I think the thing that I find the most interesting about the Wicked Fabrications GT51 is that it has a completely opposite approach to being a show car in terms of its spec than virtually all of the others of this kind in the game. If you compare it to the Camaros, the Novas, the Corvettes, the Mac 40, most of those cars tend to have a fairly obvious approach. Iconic, old school car, way more power, way more straight line performance. They are show cars first at the end of the day, so many of them aren't really designed for competition, sometimes of any kind, sometimes just straight line performance, which isn't a problem, but it does beg the question of why they're featured so often in games like GT Sport and GT7, a game which isn't really about show cars at all, which in my opinion is what makes games like Gran Turismo 4, 5 and 6 more appropriate games to have cars like this in. One of my earliest memories of loving a show car in Gran Turismo is, in my opinion, still one of the best we've ever had in a Gran Turismo game, the Buick Special, which is not a stock version. That's a heavily modified show car called the Wicked. A fantastic car, especially in Gran Turismo 4 for its price. These, though, nowadays, and maybe it's just me, but I feel like it's this kind of car that I end up buying in an update, using once or twice, doing a review, and then pretty much never using it again, more often than not. Maybe as a drift car, at best. So it begs the question, are they worth buying at all? On this occasion, is this one worth buying? And crucially, why is this one, in my opinion, better than many of the others? Well, simply put, to answer the last question first, the reason why I find this one more interesting and potentially more useful is because it takes a 180-degree different approach to all of the others. See, most of the others have quite a lot of weight, or at least a modest amount of weight, mostly focus on power. This one, total opposite. The weight is really low, and the power is really low, so it has almost more of like a track toy approach. Barely 350 or so horses, the weight is only just over 1,300 kilos, so really good numbers to be working with. I mean, 372 horsepower isn't that crazy, 1,338 kilos certainly isn't. Those are like decent sports car numbers, and yet it's in this old school hot rod body with the longer back end than front end, much like my own car, Abe. And of course I immediately have an affinity for something like that, but there is one thing that I would say you have to do to this car if you want it to be useful at all in competition, and interestingly, it's not brakes, it's not suspension, it's not tyres, it's the diff. You have to fit the racing diff. The fully customised LSD is an essential purchase for this car, even if you don't do anything else. Take this one for example. I'm running it on comfort softs, weight loss and nothing else, and I haven't adjusted anything except that diff. And the reason why is because this car basically doesn't have a diff as standard. It's kind of like driving a bathtub with 380 horsepower, because when you throw it into a corner, it's pretty smooth, it's pretty controlled. The fact that the power is quite modest means it's not that gnarly to drive, but when you do lose grip, even just to one wheel, you can't recover. It just goes into a full 180-degree spin and ends up facing the wrong way. You can't control the drift 9 times out of 10, you can't hold the drift, it just spins out in that very vintage or antique car kind of way. So having that race LSD is, in my opinion, the essential thing to do first. The one that I'm driving here has that, and it made a world of difference. Now even then, you'll still see me spin out in the race, but you can recover it, and 9 times out of 10, it's a very competitive car, even if you don't really touch the power. That to me is the great thing about the car, because having that modest power means that the point level is low as well. Stock, this thing is not that much higher than 500 points, and that is very useful. To have this radically different alternative to a modern sports car or a JDM car, it means that those of us like myself who love classics, love vintage, especially like classic American, hot rods, low riders, muscle cars, pony cars, it means you've actually got a genuinely useful contender to work with. You could use this as a base and tune it up and be something of a weapon. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and say that this is some vehicle that's going to destroy everything if you just unlock that magical secret tune, but I will say, if you do want to use it, at least against the AI, maybe even against real people on the right track with the right tuning at the right point level, it could actually be kind of a sleeper hit, because it's quick for its power, the weight is super low, and even lower when you drop it. This thing barely weighs a ton, so even if you leave the power standard, that's a 350 horsepower per ton muscle car. Those are good numbers, really good numbers, especially when the point level is not that high. And of course, being a show car, the price is a bit higher than some, it's 300,000, which is similar territory to like a Group 4 race car. If you put it that way, it doesn't sound as good, but for a car that's so heavily modified already, a one-off, a custom, I don't think that's too bad. 300 grand isn't difficult to earn in Gran Turismo. So yeah, I would actually say that I find this to be one of the more interesting choices of custom, or show car, or SEMA car, or GT award winner. Between these and stuff like vintage race cars, classic race cars, I will choose the vintage and classic racers every single time if I can. For some reason though, Kaz definitely seems to have more of an affinity for these kind of cars, which is fine, but they just don't make as much sense in a game that's supposedly about racing first, because show cars really aren't about racing, almost at all. So it's an interesting choice to make, but it's still cool to have something that's a bit different. For me, this is one of my preferred show car style machines in the game, so of course if you haven't used it, you might want to look into it. It doesn't have the sheer power of a Nova, or, you know, the Camaro, or the Mach 40 Mustang. It's no way near as quick as those in a straight line. But for cornering, it is better than some, and crucially for the point level ability, for that kind of manipulation that you can do to make it competitive, this one might be the hidden gem from the bunch. So give me your thoughts down below. Do you like the car? Do you already use it maybe for something? If you do find it really useful for a particular event or point level, absolutely drop that down below for other people to benefit from. And of course, stick around on the channel for more in future. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.